If you're tired of these promos, supporters get the podcast early and ad-free. Just go to donate.bogosity.tv for the links to sign up. Welcome to the Bogosity Podcast for the week of April 2nd, 2023. The podcast that finds Waldo in books that aren't Where's Waldo. This is your host, Shane Killian. Let's perfoliate the news of the bogus. If you're wondering why I haven't covered the Chem.com mega upload case in a long time, well, that's because there's been nothing to report. And now in this update, there's still nothing to report. So much so that the lawsuits are now marked as inactive. It's been over a decade since a raid by law enforcement took down the first cloud storage site, as .com became the prime target in a major copyright case. This, despite the fact that neither the United States, where the case is, nor New Zealand, where .com lives, has a law against secondary criminal copyright infringement. Through it all, .com's been left twisting in the wind awaiting the result of his extradition case. But both the government's case against him and the civil lawsuits filed by the RIAA and the MPA have stalled out. Mega Upload has successfully argued that the civil trial should wait for the result of the criminal trial, and the courts have agreed. Now, the court has removed both cases from the active docket. Quote, "It appearing to the court that this case has been stayed nearly continuously since June 10, 2014, it is hereby ordered that this case be, and the same hereby is, stricken from the active docket and placed on the inactive docket." It might not even be accurate to call it inactive. The extradition case is no nearer a resolution, and once it is, even if .com is forcibly moved to America to stand trial, it could take another decade after that. So it may just be the case that we will never see the civil cases happen in .com's lifetime. And in all those years, the total effect all of this had on the amount of piracy has been absolutely none whatsoever. If you're looking for a way to support this channel, but you don't have any spare cash and you can't stand ads, you can do so by generating your own cryptocurrency. Use the links at the bottom of the description to follow the link to Odysee.com to listen to the podcast and see all of my YouTube videos as well. Just watching videos will produce cryptocurrency for the creator and yourself. And since Odysee is always monetized and never censored, you'll have no problem seeing all the videos from your favorite creators. You can also use the library credits you create at Odysee to tip creators and even purchase paid content. Earn library credits through various rewards, including daily view rewards and the number of shares and invites. And you can interact with creators in all sorts of ways, including like and dislike, comment, boost a post by supporting it, repost it, and share to other sites, all while earning crypto for the creator. Easily monetize yourself and your favorite creators using cryptocurrency, without advertising. Use the link below to visit this channel on Odysee.com and see many of your other favorites there as well. One thing we've noted over and over again over the history of this podcast is how people will instantly use a mass shooting to either push their political agenda or denigrate their opponents. And if they can't do either of those, they'll just ignore it. Glenn Greenwald has a blog post covering the opportunists and the harm they do to all of us. He starts with the 2017 shooting by a hardcore Democrat less than 6 months into Trump's presidency who, quote, had sought to kill GOP lawmakers based on his belief that Republicans were corrupt traitors, fascists, and Kremlin agents. The writings he left behind permitted little doubt that he was driven to kill by the relentless messaging he heard from his favorite cable host, MSNBC's Rachel Maddow, and other virulently anti-Trump pundits about the evils of the GOP. And yet, on the rare occasion the news media did cover that one, they didn't in any way come close to blaming Maddow or MSNBC. And the same, as he points out, of black nationalists over the last several years. In fact, you'll see the Twitterati claim that all of these mass shooters are white because they never even heard of these. Quote, most media outlets and liberal politicians correctly refuse to assign blame to pundits and politicians who spew anti-police rhetoric or insist that the U.S. is a nation of white supremacy. the animating ideas of these murders. Yet in these cases, they go much further with their denialism. Many deny that this ideology even exists at all. But it's different when it's someone on the right doing it. Quote, "When murders are carried out in the name of liberal ideology, there is a rational and restrained refusal to blame liberal pundits and politicians who advocate the ideology that animated those killings. Yet when killings are carried out in the name of right-wing ideologies despised by the corporate press and mainstream pundits, or ideologies that they falsely associate with conservatism, they instantly leap to lay blame at the feet of their conservative political opponents who, despite never having advocated or even implied the need for violence, are nonetheless accused of bearing guilt for the violence, often before anything is known about the killers or their motives." He mentions Claiborne v. NAACP, where the state of Mississippi tried to hold the NAACP responsible for violence carried out by its members, but the court ruled, quote, "To impose liability without a finding that the NAACP authorized, either actually or apparently, or ratified unlawful conduct would impermissibly burden the rights of political association that are protected by the First Amendment." After the Buffalo supermarket shooting, they found the shooter's 180-page manifesto filled with left-wing authoritarianism. He spoke out against cryptocurrency, praised environmental extremism, and railed against capitalism's exploitation of the people as hard as any socialist. In addition, he also complained that the white race is dwindling in number. So what did the mainstream media do? They blamed it on Fox News and Tucker Carlson, despite there being no indication the shooter even knew who Carlson was. And they didn't let the fact that his manifesto has a section titled, "Conservatism is dead, thank God," get in their way. Quote, "So desperate and uncontrolled was this ghoulish attempt to blame Carlson for the Buffalo shootings that my email inbox and social media feeds were festering with various liberal pundits demanding to know why I had not yet manifested my views of this shooting. As though it is advisable or even possible to formulate definitive opinions about a complex mass murder spree that had just taken place less than 5 hours before." As it happened, I was on an overnight international flight on Saturday and into Sunday morning. I deeply apologize for my failure to monitor and speak on Twitter 24 hours a day. But even if I had not been 40,000 feet in the air, what kind of primitive and despicably opportunistic mindset is required not only to opine so definitively about how your political opponents are guilty of a heinous crime before the corpses are even taken away, but to demand that everyone else do so as well? Of course, the last thing they'd want is to be consistent about that, because that would mean accepting the blame when atrocities are committed by one of their own. Quote, "If a homicidal maniac kills an abortion doctor, then all peaceful pro-life activists are blamed. If an LGBT citizen is killed, then anyone who shares the views that Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton had until 2012 about marriage equality is blamed. If a police officer unjustifiably kills a black citizen, all police supporters or those who dissent from liberal orthodoxy on racial politics are decreed guilty. But liberals are never at fault when right-wing politicians are murdered, or police officers are hunted and gunned down by police opponents, or an anti-abortion group is targeted with firebombing or arson, as just happened in Wisconsin, or radical Muslims engage in random acts of violence. By definition, moral reasoning that is applied only in one direction has nothing to do with morality and everything to do with crass, exploitative opportunism." Well said, which is another reason I don't like commenting on them for at least 48 hours. The real question is, how much longer are people going to tolerate the news media behaving like this? If you're on the Wi-Fi in a coffee shop or hotel, anyone on that network can get your traffic. Do you really trust all of those strangers? For that matter, do you really trust your ISP? A VPN can protect you from prying eyes, disguise your location, and even foil government censors. It's essential in this day and age, so go to vpn.bogosity.tv and you'll be taken to BoxPN. Starting at just $2.99 a month, you can get unlimited high-speed connections to VPN servers all over the world, and they don't log connections, so your privacy is assured. Traveling abroad, just VPN home, and don't worry about what those other governments are doing. Back at home, stop your ISP from traffic shaping and messing with the quality internet access you're paying good money for. You can connect from multiple machines at once, including your smartphone or tablet, and it supports all the secure standards, including OpenVPN and SSTP. Bypass censors and surveillance with your own secure VPN connection. Go to vpn.bogosity.tv. So we've covered how Social Security and entitlement programs like it are mathematically unsustainable. We've also covered projections as to when it will be insolvent. Now, according to the Social Security trustees, it'll happen sooner than expected, just 10 years from now. Oh, of course, about the time I hit retirement age. It's been years since the program has had to begin dipping into its own trust fund to make up the difference. Of course, since it isn't really a trust fund and politicians spent the money decades ago, it really just gets funded with general taxes. But as inflation rises and the economic outlook worsens, it'll be just 2033 before they won't even be able to do that anymore. And when that happens, it'll mean a 23% cut in benefits. And that means that the way policymakers have been dealing with the problem in the past, that is, pretending it doesn't exist and kicking the can down the road even further, just isn't going to cut it. Quote, "The trustees continue to recommend that Congress address the projected trust fund shortfalls in a timely fashion to phase in necessary changes gradually. With informed discussion, creative thinking, and timely legislative action, Social Security can continue to protect future generations." One solution is to increase payroll taxes, but that'll just mean increasing the tax burden on younger, less wealthy workers. Another solution is means testing, so that rich retirees that can live on their own net worth aren't a burden on the rest. Yeah, good luck getting the boomers to go for that. In fact, if there were any fairness or justice in taxation, it's these rich retirees who'd be taxed to pay for their poor counterparts. Hashtag tax the boomers. Other solutions being discussed include raising the retirement age, changing the benefits formula, and raising the cap on the payroll tax. Of course, any such discussions anyone tries to have is met with screeching from the Biden administration that they're trying to steal money from poor retirees who just can't live without it. The National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare has also called it a slippery slope toward privatization. By the way, in case you're wondering if even the 2033 prediction is optimistic, well, one of the trustees is Janet Yellen, so you're probably right. But please remember that those over 65 are the wealthiest age demographic. This is kind of a reverse welfare program. Young, poor people are taxed to pay off rich, old people. And if means testing isn't even on the table, how can there be any movement toward a solution? Do you have children, or nieces or nephews? Are you homeschooling, or just want to counter some of the socialist indoctrination most children get in school? If so, go to bogosity.tv/TuttleTwins, and you'll be taken to a website where you can get some great books for elementary-aged children. The Tuttle Twins books are books about liberty and free market economics that include children's versions of Bastiat's The Law, Leonard Read's I, Pencil, and Hayek's The Road to Serfdom, as well as books about the Federal Reserve and how regulations protect business cronies. They'll learn about the harm caused by eminent domain, or regulations passed in the name of safety, and fundamental concepts of liberty. And as you can see from the sample pages on the website, they're all easy to read and nicely illustrated. They're just $9.99 a piece, or get a special discount as well as free bonuses when you purchase all 5. You can even buy in bulk to donate to schools and local libraries. So get the Tuttle Twins books at bogosity.tv/TuttleTwins. And now it's time to silver plate this week's biggest bogon emitter. And it's more AI hysteria as the Center for AI and Digital Policy screeches that GPT-4 violates the FTC's rules against unfair and deceptive practices. And no, GPT-4 doesn't fall short of what OpenAI claims it can do. So how do they get to an FTC violation? Only through extremely tortured logic. They're calling for a pause on all AI research until the FTC can investigate the risks to public safety. And what are those risks? GPT-4 could be used by malicious actors to write malware. Of course, so could Notepad. Also of concern is the idea that GPT-4 could be used to write highly effective propaganda, effectively competing with the news media. And you knew it was going to be in there. Biases in training data could result in racial stereotypes and gender preferences in hiring. In their filing, they say, quote, "It is time for the FTC to act. There should be independent oversight and evaluation of commercial AI products offered in the United States. CAIDP urges the FTC to open an investigation into OpenAI, enjoin further commercial releases of GPT-4, and ensure the establishment of necessary guardrails to protect consumers, businesses, and the commercial marketplace." Geez, this sounds like it was written by an AI. Of course, what would any such diatribe be without the pages and pages of "think of the children"? Quote, "Overuse of digital media may place your children at risk of not enough sleep, obesity, delays in learning and social skills, negative effects on school performance, behavior problems, problematic internet use, risky behavior, sexting, loss of privacy and predators, and cyberbullying. The public introduction of AI-powered chatbots arrives during an epidemic of teen mental health. A recent report from the CDC found that 57% of teenage girls felt persistently sad or hopeless in 2021, and that 1 in 3 seriously contemplated suicide. And that has what to do with AI? And how does any of that constitute unfair and deceptive practices? As bogus as that is at the best of times, they aren't even trying to say that the people who pony up 6 cents for 1,000 prompts are being harmed or defrauded. Precisely none of them have complained. Mostly it seems to be summarized by, "Wah, GPT isn't giving people answers we like." But anything that's new and scary is going to freak out the Neo-Luddites. The one thing they're correct about is that AI is going to dramatically change society, just like the Industrial Revolution, the Model T, and the Information Age. It's acting like that's a bad thing that makes people hold back the progress of all mankind. So all of that makes the Center for AI and Digital Policy this week's biggest bogon emitter. I want to tell you about the eyeglasses I've been wearing for years. As people can see on my videos, I have a very strong prescription, which makes glasses more expensive, especially when I need computer glasses, reading glasses, prescription sunglasses, and most expensively, progressive lenses for general everyday wear. To save money while still getting quality glasses, I get them from Firmoo. In fact, I just got a pair of progressives with high-index aspherical lenses and a nice pair of frames my wife loves for just over $100. It would have been $500 to get them through my eye doctor. Not only do they look good, the glasses are durable. I've worn many pairs for several years without problems. All orders come with a 30-day return policy, a 3-month warranty, and one-on-one customer service. Go to Firmoo, that's FIRMOO.Bogosity.tv anytime you need quality glasses at a low price. Once again, that's Firmoo.Bogosity.tv. And now let's opsonize this week's Idiot Extraordinaire. And as near as I can figure, Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg is a closet Trump fan because he just handed him the 2024 election on a silver platter. He indicted Trump on the laughable manufactureversy of paying hush money to porn actress Stormy Daniels. When even the Wall Street Journal's editorial board calls it the weakest of charges, you know it's contrived. Even the New York Times said the case, quote, hinges on an untested and therefore risky legal theory involving a complex interplay of laws, all amounting to a low-level felony. And that somehow makes it worth being the first time in history a former president has been indicted. The crime Bragg is apparently going for is falsifying business records. Ordinarily, that's a misdemeanor in New York. In order to make it a felony, the business records would specifically have to be altered to cover up a crime. But there's hardly anything illegal about sex with a porn star. Not only that, but the statute of limitations on it is 5 years, and it's about 2 years past that. Apparently, the crime he's going to say is concealed is a campaign finance violation, but those are federal laws which cannot be litigated in state court. The tortured, twisted logic is that Trump did that because if the affair had become known, it would totally have ruined his chances to be president, and that makes it a campaign contribution. It doesn't, so this is several levels of bewilderment. It doesn't help that his key witness is Michael Cohen, a felon convicted of multiple counts of perjury. On Truth Social, a social media site where all of the posts seem to be by or about Donald Trump, the former president said in a series of posts, quote, "This is an attack on our country, the likes of which has never been seen before. It is likewise a continuing attack on our once free and fair elections. The USA is now a third world nation, a nation in serious decline. So sad. They only brought this fake, corrupt, and disgraceful charge against me because I stand with the American people, and they know that I cannot get a fair trial in New York." He seemed to take glee in posting screenshots from polls showing his numbers going up significantly since the announcement. Trump also faces indictments in Georgia for allegations that are at least more credible, but after this, the perception at least is that this is what Trump has been saying. It's all part of a witch hunt against him. Which would also track if Bragg is secretly a Trump supporter and wanted to undermine these other indictments. Of course, we're also awaiting the indictments that are coming any day now, just you wait, for mishandling classified documents and masterminding the Jan 6 insurrection. These and other problems are why none other than Alan Dershowitz called the move, quote, "a foolish, foolish decision." One issue is how they might get around the statute of limitations. They could have argued that the clock was paused while he was out of state, since there was no way to indict him. But he was in Florida when they indicted him, so there goes that idea. And it's a case that was not only repeatedly rejected by New York before, but also the Justice Department and the Federal Election Commission. Dershowitz said that Trump's lawyers should make a motion to dismiss immediately on statute of limitations grounds, as well as on the grounds that the crime he's charged with doesn't fit the facts as alleged. Of course, he also added the disclaimer that, with New York courts, it's impossible to predict what will happen. So all of that makes Alvin Bragg this week's Idiot Extraordinaire. Well, that wraps up this. You have exactly 10 seconds to change that look of disgusting pity into one of enormous respect edition of the Bogosity Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please go to donate.bogosity.tv for several ways to support and discord.bogosity.tv to join the discussion. Subscribe at Patreon or Subscribestar, and you can listen early and ad-free. Thank you for listening. Until next time, here's a quote from Thomas Sowell. "When you want to help people, you tell them the truth. When you want to help yourself, you tell them what they want to hear." The Bogosity Podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. Bogosity.